All right, welcome everybody. So today I want to talk a little bit about the Enigma machine. And the Enigma was a cryptographic machine that was used by the Germans during World War II. And I had a kind of a childhood interest in cryptography and codes, I think like a lot of kids. And there's actually there's a book that I got when I was a kid. It's Codes, Ciphers, and Secret Writing by Martin Gardner, who was writing for the Scientific American. He had a column there, but this book, he's a bunch of compiled writings about codes and things like that. And I think that's where I got my initial interests. So after the invention of eBay and things like that, where you could actually kind of get out in the world, and I actually joined a Bletchley Park interest group, just like a public forum, a news group, and on Usenet. And someone came along and said that they had an Enigma machine. So I actually started collecting antique cryptographic machines. But today we're just going to talk about the Enigma. Let's see, I'll give you a little bit of background about my goal for the talk is not only to understand like a little bit about how it fits into history, but really get into the demystifying the technical, the way that it works. You know, like a lot of these things seem like black boxes and seem very, very complicated, but it's actually, the principles are really simple. So, so on the left there, you'll see a picture of the Enigma machine. And it is kind of like the size of a cash register or a typewriter. And it has 26 lettered keys on it. There are no numbers or no upper or lower case. It's just letters. On the front of the machine, you'll see a plug board. Can everyone see that picture okay? That plug board allows you to plug in usually about 10 different patch cords that connect one letter to another, but I'll kind of explain what the function of that. Now, it doesn't print, or it doesn't have any paper in there. It has a battery. So when you press a key, it'll light up a light. And that's all it does. And then you keep pressing keys to send your message. On the right is a German Army officer, general, who is in a portable command station. And that is the kind of a typical contingent of people using the Enigma machine. There's a radio operator you can see with the headphones on. I presume he's listening to the Morse code on the radio and transcribing a message. And then there's an operator there of the Enigma itself typing the letters to decode a message. So that is kind of and this is a colorized picture. I've seen this picture. Bostanova Bill showed me this picture in color, and I was like, oh, that's cool that somebody colorized it. But I've seen that in black and white originally. So let's see, next slide. So here's a little close-up of an Enigma machine. You see the 26 letters, and then this is with the cover open. You can see there are 26 lights as well. So each letter is associated with one of the lights. And then down at the bottom, you can see the actual plug board with a few plugs plugged in, and they're kind of two socket plugs that go into that machine. There's a detail of the plug board. You can see a couple of letters that are this is called a Stecker in German, or plug board. And so you see there's to use it as a verb, you'd see that there's 2 or 4 different letters that are steckered together in pairs. So that they're basically cross-connecting those letters, so that the letters on the lights and the keys are actually kind of transposed by that. Inside the machine, there's also a unit which is called a scrambler unit, or the rotors. And each of these rotors, there's usually in the war, Germany usually used up 5 of these rotors. And then each day they would say which rotors were supposed to be used by everyone within a certain communication net. And that would be indicated on the code sheet for the month. And then people would read off, a daily code indicator, which said, which rotors and in which order they should be put into the machine. Oh, and you see these rotors have numbers on them, but other machines had letters on them. But letter 1 is A, 2 is B, etc. So, and they were all compatible. This is the inside of a rotor. So I've never taken mine apart, but I believe this might be a picture from the it's either the National Cryptological Museum in Maryland or the Smithsonian. I'm not sure where this picture comes from originally, but you can see the structure of a rotor is really just 26 wires that connect a set of electrical connections on the right half of the rotor to another set of electrical connections on the left half of a rotor. And so you can think of it, each rotor as doing a permutation of the alphabet where it converts one letter to a different letter. And since the rotor moves and can spin as you're coding a message, that permutation shifts. So it doesn't always do the exact same thing. It can do 26 different permutations as it's rotating around. Okay. This is diagrammatically what is happening inside of an Enigma machine. So the lines here on this side of the chart stand for wires that represent every letter of the alphabet, or you could think of this as the keyboard, or alternatively the lights. So like A at the top going down through Z at the bottom. And so when you type a letter, you make an electrical connection from the battery that goes maybe through a plug board setting, and it'll come down through a particular plug, and then enter into the right-hand rotor first, get scrambled by whatever permutation that is doing. Then that connects to the middle rotor, which then gets scrambled again, and then the left-hand rotor. And then finally, it goes through what's called the Umkehrvalse, or the reflector rotor, which in some machines is static, and other machines actually can turn as a rotor itself. But it basically has 13 wires that just connect one set of letters to another set of letters, and it looks pretty random. So like, and when you go in with an A, it might come out as a Y. I think on this diagram, it looks like that wire at the top is coming out near the bottom. So, and notice also that the Y, if A is connected to Y, then Y is also connected to A. So it's a reciprocal relationship, and all letters are kind of pairwise converted one from the other. And that's an important feature of the Enigma machine, that no letter will ever be encrypted to itself. And it's always reciprocal, or, it's invertible. So like if A goes to Y, Y will go to A. And that's true of like any message that you send in an Enigma machine. When it's set up, you don't have to change the setting of the machine for decoding versus encoding. You just set it up in the same configuration. And if you type the coded message, the plain text message comes out. And if you type in the plain text message, the coded message comes out. So it's really just doing reciprocal, it's just doing pairwise permutations of the alphabet. Okay, let's switch over. Let me turn on a camera here. So take a look at the Enigma. So this is my Enigma machine, and I'll leave the light on at first. I'm going to turn this light off so you can see the lights coming on, but I'll go ahead and open up the machine to start. So the operation of the Enigma machine is you kind of press down and hold, and you can't see it very well here, but like one of these lights is lighting up. And you notice that every time I press a letter, that rotor on the right is spinning. Can you see that okay? Maybe someone can unmute and tell me they can't hear it. See it?
Yes. Yeah, looks good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So this is the inside of an Enigma machine. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit more. You can see that. There we go. So you can see the connections here on the right. This is where the keyboard is, and the lights are connected on this side. And you can undo you undo this little lever on the side, and you can open it up so that you can actually remove all these rotors. And see if I get the camera to refocus. There we go. So you see on the right-hand side, there's these pins, and they're all kind of spring-loaded pins. And this is rotor number 3. You can see it labeled there. And on the left side of the rotor, they have these flat plates. So the pins on one rotor will mate up with those plates on the other. And that's how the electrical connection is made through the rotor. Every rotor has a series of notches here, and those are actually, a pawl will engage that and kind of move the notches through. Let's see, my camera.
Is the material Bakelite?
I think it is. It does look a lot like Bakelite. Yeah. Let's see, let me get my camera. There we go. And it smells like Bakelite. Let's see. And here you can see, let's see, there we go, focus. So mine has numbers on it as well. Now, one thing that confused me a lot about the Enigma was the what they call the ring settings. And this is what they call the ring. There's a kind of a rotatable ring around the edge of the Enigma machine that has a clip in here that can be rotated. If you open up this clip, then you can rotate this ring relative to the wiring of the rotor itself. And that's all it's doing, is just moving like the relative position of the letter you would see through the window. But more importantly, it rotates this notch. This notch is called the turnover notch. And when it mates up with the pawl in the back of the machine, that will cause this rotor and the one to its left to rotate. And when this notch is not in front of the pawl, then that pawl just slides smoothly over the edge of the rotor. So that's kind of how the rotation mechanism works. It goes at once every 26 positions, that notch will line up with the pawl in the back, and then the next wheel will kick over, and it keeps on going like that. You'll get 26 new permutations on the right, and then it'll kick over the next rotor. So even for a very long message, you'd have to go through over 17,000 roughly positions before you get a repeat. Does that make sense? How do they put spaces between words was a question. So messages were transmitted over Morse code over the radio typically, and usually the Germans would separate things into just 5-letter code groups. So spaces would not be transmitted. So you just get letters, and you have to read it from context to know where the words are. Let's see, I think you can see at the back of the machine here, I'll press a letter and see those are the pawls. So these things they're kind of spring loaded like that. And these pawls, these are the things that engage each rotor. So they basically try to spin every rotor, but if they're not lined up with a notch, they won't spin. The one on the right always spins the rotor because there's no rotor to its right to stop it. So so the right-hand rotor always advances 1 every time you press a key. All right. Put that back in. Oh, let me make sure. I'm making a set. I think I changed that ring setting. Make sure I get it back because we're going to do some decoding here, and I want to make sure it's set up properly. Yep, I changed it. I'm going to set it into the number 1 position of the ring. There we go. Okay, so I have rotor 1, rotor 2, rotor 3 in the machine right now. Oops, dropped it. Okay, so now I'm going to set up the machine to a particular setting. 13. I'm going to set it for the letters M, C, K. So 13 is the letter M, 3 is the letter C. Oh, there's 3. I don't know if you can see that. And And K is the number 11.
And Mike, as I follow along here,
yeah,
what you're setting here is the initial position, not the ring setting, right? The ring settings are all on 1?
Yeah, the ring settings I set all to number 1.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah. So if you're using a simulator online, yeah, you want all the rings to be either A. Sometimes it's called A or 1. And it's rotor 1, rotor 2, rotor 3, with the standard reflector. So actually, Bill has done a lot more research into different kinds of reflectors and stuff like that. So he was telling me about different things too. It's really interesting. So let me turn off the light here. And I'm gonna let the camera refocus. Hopefully it's not too grainy and you can see everything here. I'll push it up so you can see the letters and everything. So in this position, if you type a Q, it should light up the letter E. And that's a good way to test like that everything is set up properly. And you notice if I type another Q, you get a different letter. So the machine doesn't act the same for every letter of a message. It's because that rotor is changing, the permutation is changing. It could be any of the other 25 letters that come up in that particular position of the rotors. Set it back to 11. So that is a quick demo of the machine. Is there any questions about that?
Hey, Mike, I have a quick question. Was this particular machine refurbished in any way? And additionally, can you still get the lamps for it? Oh,
the first thing I did was put all the original lamps in a bag, and I went to Lowe's and found nearly compatible lamps that fit in all the sockets, and this just has two D cells in it as the battery. So yeah, so I didn't want to burn out the original lamps, and so yeah, these are replacement lamps, and none of them have burned out. They're pretty low voltage. You know, I'm only running 3 volts through these lights. So
and was it refurbished at all?
Not to my knowledge. The provenance and history that I was told. So the story of how I got this machine was there was a Russian professor who was working in Washington, D.C. And when he was in Europe, he had a friend who he says gave him this machine. He claimed he had never even used it himself. He'd never dared like put a battery in it and try to use it. He sent I think he was wanting to sell the machine. He needed some money at the time. And so he sent an email message to that Bletchley Park interest group and asked if everyone knew what the value of an Enigma machine was. And this was probably, gosh, I don't know, just probably 1997 or something, quite a while ago. So I replied to him. I didn't know either what they were selling for, but if we could find a recent auction or something, I would want to buy it from him. So I ended up flying to Washington, D.C. We took it to the National Cryptological Museum. They looked at it and said, yeah, that looks like an authentic Enigma to us. And so I went ahead and purchased it, brought it back on the airplane through TSA or the airport security that predated TSA. They didn't balk at it at all. They didn't care. So I'm not sure about flying with it now, what kind of looks I would get from it. I think I've only taken it on a train since then. When I went to University of Oregon, we took it on Amtrak there. So,
and based on its serial number, just one follow-up. Based on its serial number, any idea as to the actual year of manufacture?
Oh, well, Bossa Nova Bill has that information. I think he sent me some stuff. I forget now. He had actually tracked it down to how old it was and where it was purchased. So I mean, where it was manufactured, which was kind of amazing. I would have to track that down again. I don't have that at my fingertips.
Oh, no problem.
Is he on the call? I don't know.
don't know.
I hadn't seen him. So he had texted me. I thought he was interested, but anyway. So yeah, that's how I got this machine. So I want to transition now to actually bringing up the paper Enigma, and I have a little coding challenge for you, and you can see that you can do all the processes that are going on in this machine just with paper and with the aid of a paper-based simulator. So I'm going to switch over to that. It's a little overblown. Hopefully it's okay. So when I did the first talk about the Enigma for a group of MIT alumni here in Seattle, they said they wanted to do some sort of hands-on activity. So I said, well, maybe we can make a simulator. So I created this, and I wanted it to be totally compatible with a real Enigma machine. This simulates the scrambler unit. It doesn't take into account the plug board. So the action of the plug board is just to swap the meaning of two pairs of letters. So if you have the A plugged into the K, then every time you type the A on the keyboard, it's as if you had typed the K. And anytime the A light would have lit, the K light would light as well. So it kind of swaps the meaning of all the lights and each of the keys that are plugged in. So it's a pretty simple transformation, but it actually was the innovation that the Enigma was originally a commercial machine that didn't have a plug board, but when the German military adopted it, they added the plug board to it. So which made it vastly more complicated to break. So this really just simulates the scrambler unit. So so how many people have already cut out their paper Enigmas? Anyone?
I have mine.
You have yours. Okay, great. Yeah, I can't see everybody's screen right now, but let's see. Can I switch over? There we go. Yeah, I can look at people now. So so all you do for this, I made 3 rotors on the paper Enigma, and I'll kind of zoom in a little bit here more. So the way the way this works is that the rotors, each of the rotors, you cut these strips of paper out, and instead of wires, I decided to just use letters of the alphabet to indicate when one thing is connected to another. So if you see like the letter E on the right here, maybe point with this, the E here, it would be electrically connected to this E here, just, 4 positions away. So the E on the right pin would be connected to this pin on the left. So this is how you're going to trace through everything when you cut out these strips. And the way I originally started doing this is you would just cut out these strips and then you lay them down on top of these 3 positions here, and depending on which order they're in. Later on, one of the school kids who watched my who downloaded my paper Enigma from the internet, they came up with an innovation which I thought was great, and that they actually cut little slits in the piece of paper here. So you would just use like an X-Acto knife to cut from here to here, and then carefully cut from here to here and here to here, and then do the same thing at the bottom where you'd cut on the black line here, so that you could actually slide these strips of paper into the paper Enigma, and then it kind of holds them a little bit better. So now they just kind of slide up and down here, and they can be held in place. So that's the way I've done it as well now. It takes a little longer, but you don't have to do that. It's just like the pieces of paper could kind of, you have to be careful not to jostle them around and keep them in place otherwise. So I have a message for us to decode. So typically the Germans would transmit this, so you'd hear this over Morse code, you'd hear it over the air. Let's see if I can, we're going to simulate that too. Could you hear that okay?
So
It was sending the
remember,
gate out. Is this a typical speed that, or is no particular speed they would have sent it?
This probably typical or slow, maybe. It's about 15 words a minute. I recorded this one at.
so Mike, you were suffering from those audio issues I mentioned earlier, where your Zoom was trying to cancel your CW.
Okay. All right. What I sent was, yeah, and I didn't have the right setting for that. So what it sent was MCK, MCK. They would send the indicator message twice. And I'm actually cheating a little bit here. Usually they would send the encrypted version of that indicator twice. But what every message that is sent during the day, I should talk about the daily key setting. So, you know, this machine, when you think about the cryptographic security, you don't want to depend on the secrecy of the machine itself. You want to assume that your enemy knows exactly what you're using, and all of the security is going into like the key, or so the setup of the machine that is used to transmit a message. So in the Enigma machine, the setup includes kind of 4 parts. First, it's like 10 letters that are steckered together on the plug board. Then it's the ring, or actually the rotor settings that are the rotors that are used for the day and which position they're in. Then it's the ring settings of those rotors, you know, where that ring is rotated to, and consequently also where that notch appears. And yes, and then an initial position of the rotors. So which letters or numbers appear in the windows of the machine. Now that key is the same for a large number of people, like every day in a daily net. They're secret, but if every message were encoded with the exact same key, you could actually do cryptanalysis on the nth letter of every message, because they would follow the frequency distribution of the German language. You could look at the 10th letter of every message across hundreds of messages you might have intercepted that day, and you could start to see a frequency distribution, because they're all in German, and they would be coming out using the same exact code for that particular letter of the message. So what the protocol for sending messages was always for the operator to choose a random initial message key setting, or a message setting, sometimes called the text setting, and they would transmit that first. So they would send that to the receiving station, saying the rest of this message is going to be sent with the rotor setting MCK, or 13.3.11, and then they would change the rotors to that position, and then continue on encoding the rest of the message that way. So so that's what we're going to do with the paper Enigma, and the way the windows are on the paper Enigma is you look at the left-hand side of each rotor. So rotor 1 here is in position M, rotor 2 is in position C, and then I'm going to set rotor 3 to position K. So this matches what the sender said is the initial, or is the setting for the text part of the message. And then he said it's 10 letters long, and then they sent the Morse code for the message. So let's go about decoding the first letter. So the right-hand side of the paper Enigma represents both the keyboard and the lights. So we're going to start on the right, and then we're going to move our way left, go around through the rotor, the rotating, the Umkewalze, and then come back again through all the wires of the rotor again, and come out at a light. So this message, let's see, and I think I might have to back out a little bit so you can see the whole keyboard. Hopefully you can read that okay. So this message starts with the letter U, but remember whenever you press a key, so if I press the U key down on the Enigma, the very first thing that happens is that rotor spins 1 notch on the right. So the very first thing is like to lift this up to the letter L. And then we're going to start. You start with a U. U goes to the L letter. And then if I look to the left and try to find where's the L, L's up here at the top. That goes to a D. And then the D wire is connected over here. Then that connects over to W. W goes to here. That goes to K, which comes down to here, which goes to Z, which comes down to this letter Z, which goes across to another Z, coincidentally. And the Z over here is here, which comes out as a B, which is the B wire is connected to this B, and that leaves the machine at the letter P. The first letter of this message is P. So yeah, it's a little slower doing it with paper. But you can see it's not that complicated. So then we'll go on, and we'll move it up one more letter. And the next letter is B. So B, I'll try to go a little faster this time. B goes to N. N goes straight across. That goes to K. K comes down here to A, to M. That gets reflected to this M, to Y. And Y is up here to E. And then the E wire is, where's the E wire? Here, all the way down here to J, and J, S. The second letter is S. So it goes on in that way. And you can, should I leave the rest as an exercise to the reader? I think I should. You have the first two letters, PS. Now, this message you can just keep doing keep going on in that vein until you decode the whole message. You'll not have a problem. There is one, if you look on the paper Enigma machine, there is a sample message down here that you could try also decoding in the same position. This one, because it's a little bit longer, has an interesting hiccup to it. And that has to do with the notches and the turnover notch. So I've represented the turnover notch with this little arrow here on the left. So when you continue, decoding the message and you get to the point where that notch is at the top of the message, remember that both this rotor and the rotor to the left are now going to have to move up one notch. So when you get to this point and you're about to, move this up, when you move that up, you're also going to have to move that up, and then it should decode properly. So if you forget that step, then this message will get garbled after like the 12th letter of the message, because you've got the wrong rotor settings. So, so that's kind of it for the main part of the talk. Any questions?
I have a wild and open observation that I'd love your perspective on. You're someone who's studied cryptography. This strikes me simultaneously as both incredibly intelligent and incredibly dumb. And it seems like it's just a permutation cipher that is just applied, I don't know how many different ways at the same time.
Yeah.
Where is the genius in this? Is it the way all of these things are combined?
Well, there are a lot of combinations. So I forget the total. Well, if you include the plug board, you've got basically, it's kind of like, I think it's like 25 times 24 times 23, so it's kind of like 25 choose 10 divided by 2 ways. And then you have 17,000. Well, you have 60 possible rotor selections. You can 5 times 4 times 3, and then 17,000 initial positions of the rotors. So you end up with, even the scrambler has like 1 million possibilities. And we're remember in the age predating computers, so that was already thought to be pretty daunting. And then the plug board setting added millions and millions more. And I do have a little bit more. If people are understanding the machine basics, I do have a little bit more to talk about breaking the Enigma and how that was done. But yeah, there are billions. I think it's like 73 million initial positions of the Enigma machine. So it is not amenable to brute force attack at all. So the British had to be very clever. Actually, the Poles were the first to break the Enigma machine. They passed on what they knew to the British, who had maybe figured out some of it on their own anyway, but they got a big head start from the Poles, Polish effort to break Enigma. Let's see if I go back to sharing the screen here. So I think everybody knows the name Alan Turing, and Alan did work on the Enigma, cracking the Enigma code. He also worked also on this other code called well, the British called it tunny or fish. But it was a 5-bit Baudot, like a Baudot teletype code. That was used for more high-level communications. So he worked, they built the first digital computer called the Colossus at Bletchley Park in order to solve the tunny code. But the Enigma code had a couple other vulnerabilities that allowed people to break into it. There were things using kind of punched paper sheets that would overlay on each other. And they were trying to, a lot had to do with that. Remember the indicator setting at the beginning of the message where it's repeated twice? So if I send MCK, MCK, but I encode it with the machine. So it's the coded version of MCK, MCK that comes out. And it turns out there's a relationship then between the first M and the M in the first position and the M in the fourth position. And there are only certain kind of, sometimes those would end up being the same letter. And they call those, what they call those, females, I think. So anyway, when that happened, then they made a catalog of which rotor positions could do this in different positions. And there are different ways of like kind of checking that. And so that actually provided a break into being able to figure out what the rotor positions were. But the way the primary way it was broken was through these devices called the bomb, and which are not computers in any sense, but they're just basically simulating lots of Enigma machines in parallel and doing a brute force attack, a kind of a brute force attack, very cleverly. Gordon Welchman was probably less well known. He was hired into Bletchley Park very early in the war, and or even just before Britain entered the war, and he ended up being a great both the administrator and also very cleverly helping out with some key insights into making the bombs more efficient. So how do the bombs work? So the main idea is that some messages had known text in them. So for example, their weather stations would often just have the word weather report at the beginning or of the message, or they might say something like, Herr Commandant Schultz, at the beginning of a message, some sort of honorific or a title or a sign-off message. And a really interesting thing about the Enigma, if you have a long enough message like that, a long enough piece of plain text that is somewhere in your message, because no letter can encrypt to itself. If you slide like the plain text message across all the letters of the actual message, if you see any position where the letter is coming out the same, that tells you that word can't possibly be there, because that letter can't actually occur in that position. It has to get changed to one of the other 25 letters in the Enigma machine. So you can slide a long message, and if you're very confident it's in there somewhere, it's only possible in the places where those individual letters don't line up. So anyway, the bombs only worked when you had a known message, but actually they didn't have to actually be that long. due to that Welchman's special trick. So, so if you take a look at this, like here's a plain text message, Mitschlag, and it happens to encode this day to HMIXSTTMI. So now if you look at this, there's some relationships between letters. So like in position 8, the A is connected to the M in the message of you. So if you look along at that position of the message, A and M, A encodes to M. But there's also M over on the other side. Position 1, M encodes to H. So you get all these kind of relationships between letters, you know, where one letter will encode to another letter at a different part of the message, but they have some sort of relationship to each other. Well, it turns out that like if you could write a computer program and go through all the possible rotor settings, what they call this is a diagram. They build this diagram for, you know, a known plain text in a particular message, and not every rotor position there'll be, if you make a hypothesis that like maybe there's a plugboard setting between A and the letter K. If you made that hypothesis, it turns out that you run into a contradiction, because K will also be related to like some other letter. And so if you had a computer, you could actually test all of those implications of what possible plugboard settings could be. And you could run through all the possible rotor settings. And it doesn't matter what the Stecker positions are, the relative relationship of these letters, whatever letter is steckered, whatever A is steckered to has a relationship with whatever letter M is steckered to. So if you come up with a contradiction, you know that is not the valid rotor position. Well, they didn't really have computers, but this is an example of how when you stecker one, you stecker one letter to or when you have one of these letters in a diagram, it could kind of come around into a loop, into a cycle. So H is related to T, is related to I, is related to M at different positions in the message. So they came up with this machine, which the Poles had a similar machine, but not really the same at all. They happen to call it a bomb. They called this one a bomb as well. And you can see it's basically just racks and racks and racks of 3 rotor Enigmas where they can automated turn this around. And then on the back of the machine, you can see all these plugs. So they would plug in things according to the diagram of the day. And it turns out that when the rotors are in the wrong position and you electrically connect, like, what you think the letter A is going to be connected to K through the steckers, that will end up where the letter A is kind of connected to all the letters. So you'll end up with like a circuit that activates all of the letters in this kind of a vector. They had a vector of all the possible stecker positions, and they would all be electrically connected. But if you were in a rotor position that was feasible and there was no contradiction, then you would have like A connected to K, and it would just basically, there'd be no other letters kind of connected in that position, or you'd have all but one other letter connected in that position. So they built a circuit that would detect whether your vector was just a single key lit up or all but one key lit up. And that would be then a possible solve for the particular message. And it would tell you what the rotor positions were, and it would tell you some of the plugboard settings, but not all. So you still have to do some, but once you have a rotor position, working out the plugboard was more like a kind of a cryptograms puzzle you would solve out of the newspaper. So this was an American version of the bomb. It was much faster. It had 4 rotors that would run at once, and they were much faster machines, although they had less replication of rotors in them, but they ended up being quite a bit faster than the British Enigmas. So the US built a lot of these as well, and they worked on, there was a secure transatlantic cable, I think, that carried traffic between Britain and US, where they would send messages to be solved, and the Americans would help decode things as well. This is, I think this is in the one of the many rooms that had the Wrens were the British Naval Women's Auxiliary would actually, they were all the operators, and they named all the bombs after different ships and ports and things like that. So it was kind of interesting. Okay, you may have seen, like, there was a movie called The Imitation Game, which it has quite a few kind of inaccuracies in it, but it is kind of a fun thing, and hopefully we can hear. I'll play this, and hopefully I'll play a little section of them, what it was like to, well, this is their first time the bomb would work. Let's see. Can you hear it okay?
Looks good.
They send a weather report every day at 6 a.m. So that's 3 words we know will be in every 6 a.m. message. Weather, obviously, and Heil bloody Hitler. Heil bloody Hitler.
It's the 6 o'clock message from this morning.
You, the right hand of your second to weather and Hitler. These John, run voltages through those letters through the background. Will you salute? Yes, Joan. What was the last 6 a.m. message? L.
H.
H.
A. Q.
Oh my God. What happened? Did it work? I need a new message. The latest intercept.
You see the plug board? You set it.
Yes.
Now they kind of skip over how he knew the plug settings for all of that.
N. S.
S.
A.
A.
I.
I.
C.
C.
T.
T.
R.
R.
I.
I.
S.
S.
O.
O.
A.
A.
Y.
Y.
R.
R.
I.
I.
Fairness check directs the output intercept to 53 degrees 24 minutes north and output 1.
I don't think he decoded enough letters to read all of that, but anyway, I thought that was fun to see that. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna go to the next slide. Oh, that's it. That's the end of my slides. So anyway, so that's kind of in a nutshell. I know there's a lot to grasp there, but that's kind of the basics of like how the attack against the Enigma was set up. So let's see, Quinn, you said not knowing a letter cannot encode to itself would help immensely in leading a possible decryption. Yes. How did that become known? How did what become known? The fact that a letter can't encode to itself?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so when the Poles in the 30s, the Poles started working on German codes, and So they were generally aware, and this was actually a commercial machine, the Enigma. So it had that property. You know, it goes through that reflecting rotor, which imposes the problem that everything is a transposition cipher. You know, transposing 2 letters so at a time, and so they knew that through that. There's also a story that the Polish Customs Office was in possession of a shipment from Germany into Warsaw at some point, and they delayed the package over the weekend and you know, took it apart, found the wiring diagrams that were in the machine, and then put it back together again. That story is I think it predates. I think that was Weltzman claims that might have been actually just a commercial Enigma, not the actual military one. So the Poles actually worked out through mathematical means all the wiring diagrams and figured out a whole bunch of stuff. And they built their own Enigmas as well. And they ended up handing one of their homemade Enigma machines to the British before Poland was invaded.
So the machines were available pretty early in that case.
Yes, yeah, and they were used throughout the late 30s. The German military was using them in the field. They had different procedures, and they added throughout the war. They added additional rotors. They changed some of their methods and practices that made it more secure and more difficult to break. But the bombs were still able to be used all throughout the war.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And so the main thing to break at Bletchley Park was the selection of the settings. Because the wiring had been worked out.
Yeah, the wiring on the machine, it's really the key, the daily key. That was the big unknown. And you know, in occasionally the code books were captured. So like German submarines carried all their codes on printed on paper that would have water soluble ink, and every code room in the submarine had like a mesh bag with lead weights in it. And one of the very urgent instructions for radio operators was, if your ship was ever in fear of being attacked, this would be of any naval code operator, they were to place all of their secret code materials, into the mesh bags with the lead weights and throw them overboard. So they would sink to the bottom of the ocean and hopefully dissolve. But nonetheless, the British still captured some code material occasionally. So in that case, they ended up having however much the remainder of the month, because they printed on one sheet of paper, would have all the codes for the month written as you'd read across one line of the paper would be for each day. And at midnight, it would switch to a new key at midnight every day. But there were multiple nets too. It's like it wasn't just one global, like all the German armed forces, like the Navy used their own codes, the Army had their own, and the Army and the Luftwaffe sometimes shared codes because they needed to talk to each other and coordinate. So there were a lot of different nets to work on. Italy, so Russia and the Eastern Front had different codes than the Western, different keys than the Western Front. So Bletchley was kept pretty busy breaking the codes, but often once they got good at it, they were often able to break. And once you break the key for one of the net, you get it for all stations operating in that net all day long. So they were often able to, break the codes before breakfast, and then they could read messages all day, all day. And there are reports that occasionally the intelligence from these messages were decoded and sent to British commanders in the field before their German counterparts had managed to get the same message. Let me put this back up. We could also, if you want to decode, you could decode the message I sent out to you guys. or do a couple letters of it just to show you. Trying to remember. Let's see. Oh, sorry. Stop. Let me get that message up on my screen. Okay, there it is. U. So you see the Enigma okay?
Yes.
So it's set up as 13, 3, 11. That's the starting position. So U, that's a P. It's kind of blown out there, but B. Yeah, there's the S. W. R. I. That's a G. All right, PSRG. That's the first 4 letters of the message today. So, all right. Any other questions?
Hey, Mike. Jack, your KI7RMU. Hey, did you ever get a chance to talk to Stephen W0TTY about the Enigma they had down at the Paul Allen's Computer Science Museum?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering whether that's still down there or not. Okay.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that. I've been to that museum when it was first open. I don't remember having an Enigma there. That's cool.
It might have been part of a temporary exhibit, but it was upstairs for a while. I'd seen it down there. I'll have to ask Stephen about that.
Well, I know of at least 2 other Enigma owners in Bellevue.
In Bellevue?
Yes. Well, maybe Medina.
Right. Do you guys send each other messages?
No, we do not. Yeah. Yeah, I was at a company party at Bill Gates's house, and he had an Enigma machine on the shelf in his library.
Just happens to be sitting there.
Yeah, it was on display. It was he collected. He had a guy who was working for him who he liked to collect scientific artifacts and things like that, and antique computing devices and stuff things like that. So when he found something interesting, he would send Bill, say, hey, I found this thing, would you like it? And probably Bill was being very busy at the time, but saying, sure, send it to me. So he has an Enigma there.
Oh, that's great. Wow, great presentation, Mike. That is awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Mike, got a question for you.
Yeah.
My memory's not good, but it seems to me I read somewhere that towards the end of the war, they added another wheel to it to make it more complicated.
Well, they went from 3 to 5 rotors. And that was pretty early in the war. And that's the thing that when the Poles were solving the Enigma regularly on their own with just a handful of mathematicians at the Warsaw University who were working on cryptography. And but when they added the 5 rotors, they were like, that overwhelmed them. They had 10 times as much. They were kind of just barely able to kind of keep up with it as it was. So that was a big impetus for them to do the knowledge transfer, and they tried to give it to the French. The French kind of poo-pooed it. They didn't really take the information, but they did have a little conference. They had some of the British cryptanalysts come actually visit Poland, and they had a little conference, and that's when they gave them the machine and all the knowledge they had about how they were breaking it. So then they replicated that at Bletchley Park, and then expanded it with a lot of automation and a pretty huge workforce, many thousands of people working on this, not just at Bletchley Park, but in other locations too. Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions for Mike?
And I'll just thank Mike. And I've been to Bletchley Park a couple of times, and it's a great experience. Yeah,
that's cool. I have not visited myself. I would love to go visit. Yeah, I think I probably would have done had COVID not popped up. But yeah, it's on our list of places to visit soon. I heard a story at Bletchley Park that there was this they had put up an exhibit about this technique, which I forget exactly what it was. It was called Banburismus, and they had an exhibit about it. And one of the people in MI6, the British code breaking agency, they came to the museum and saw it and freaked out and said, "That is still classified. You can't talk about that here." And he stood in front of the exhibit and refused to move until they took it down. So I think it's all out of the bag now, but the British, had a very, they didn't like Gordon Welchman writing this book in the 70s, and all, they really didn't want to talk about what they did.
Well, they didn't like Alan Turing either, but that's a different story.
For different reasons. Yeah.
Some of that equipment was being used in third world countries still quite late. Because it was better than nothing and it was available, and they were still actually harvesting stuff quite a while after World War II, and it was clearly broken to the Allies, but it was still in use.
I've heard that story too, and even that the British encouraged other countries to adopt this machine, and not telling them that they could easily read all their messages. Yeah. There's other kind of cryptographic machines with similar backdoors in them. There was a company called, I think it still exists, maybe Crypto AG, and I think they had several employees working with the NSA to help them deliver devices to other countries that were not as secure as they thought they were. Yeah.
Mike, is there anything funny that happens if you set the stecker to something that's in the reflector?
No.
Nothing happens?
No, nothing weird. So it's just like the transformation that occurs is like stepwise, keyboard, stecker, rotor 1, rotor 3, rotor 2, rotor 1, reflector, rotor 1, rotor 2, rotor 3, stecker, lights. So each of those steps is, the rotors are transforming, all 26 letters to 26 different letters through their random wiring permutation. The reflecting rotor is doing a pairwise swap, and so all of those transformations happen, independently, and then come back, go down and back the machine, and this is really it's not, I wouldn't really call it as an electronic device. It's electromechanical, it's just, the only purpose of the electricity is to trace the wires to the lamp, and tell you what's connected.
Yeah, the just mechanically, it's very, very well built, and it allows a great deal of flexibility. And beneath that, it's just letter swapping.
Yes, it is. It's just letter swap. Every position of the Enigma is just letter swapping. Yeah, but from a huge number of possible ways of letter swapping. Yeah. So, and it is heavy. It's a heavy machine. I can, see there are similar cryptographic devices used by the U.S. Army that are, 1/5 the weight of the Enigma that were used in the field. Yeah. And I guess there are other models, according to Jack, that were lighter. I don't know about those.
And so from that little snapshot of the movie you showed us, and then also what you were saying earlier, was it originally cracked by messages being too predictable? They just contained keywords that we expected all the time? Absolutely.
That was a huge, without the plain text, the guess of the plain text settings, that was a huge part of like what enabled the messages to continue to be read. Another aspect was just poor operating procedures, letting people choose their own message indicators. They would often get lazy and they'd choose QWE or ASD. There's some very common, kind of just human laziness that came into play that led to a lot of the breaks early on in the war. And the Germans kind of later tightened up things and improved procedures. And but they didn't anticipate that stuff like the known plain text attack with a semi-automated bomb working on it would be even possible. So yeah, it kind of points out that you really need like a black hat team within your or a white hat team within your communications group that actually actively tries to break your own codes so that you are not blindsided by what's possible.
I guess now a lot of places have red team, blue team setups, right?
Yeah, I think if you're going to be inventing a cryptographic system, you definitely want a lot of people trying to break it, who don't have the same incentives as you to want it to be secure. So, yeah.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Mike. Any other questions for Mike?
That's amazing.
Well, thank you, everybody. That was fun, and I hope you enjoyed it. And good luck decoding the rest of the message.
Well, just before I turn off the recording, in that case, can I give the spoiler
of what is the message?
Of what is the message? Because I have decoded it.
I have no objection, but so anyone who's listening to this recording later, close your ears now, because Quentin's going to tell what the rest of the message is.
All right, you should have decoded PSRG is cool.
That's it. Yes.
I'll second that. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
You're welcome, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Mike.
Take care, all. Thank you.